Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we've got a special guest in the Personality Hacker Studios, Denzel Mensah. Good morning, Denzel. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you, Joel?
Fantastic. I'm glad to have you here. We've actually known of you for years. You've been an influencer online in the type community, the personality type community, talking about personality types, talking about your faith, talking about all sorts of different things you're interested, models, maps, and systems of being a better human being. I've always been impressed by the way you show up so you're an ENFJ in the Myers-Briggs system.
Yes, sir.
So today we're going to give you ENFJs listening some love because we get a lot of, when you and I were talking about this offline too.
Yeah.
You feel like ENFJs don't get as much attention as INFJs in the world.
We don't get enough attention from much people. That's what I think.
Yeah. So this will be a good conversation because of that. And you have this knack of like this, I call it like a peacemaking vibe about you. When you show up online, when you show up to discussions on Twitter, on your Facebook, on YouTube, you have this presence of really trying to help people bridge misunderstandings and find the through line of what people can agree on. And maybe that comes from your Enneagram, personality type, which is you identify as a 9 social, right?
Yes, 9 social sexual.
So maybe it comes from that. I don't know. But I think that Antonia and I really appreciate that about you the most, is that ability to play in different spaces and really shift perspectives and get a sense of what people are trying to say. So we wanted to invite you in the studio to talk a little bit about your experiences as an ENFJ, a 20-something ENFJ in the world. And I guess maybe the way we could start it out is, could you describe, how did you come into typology? Like, how did you find Myers-Briggs as an example, finding out that you're an ENFJ? And maybe we could start there, and then we can go from that point.
My current wife, Jamila, and my best friend, David, they actually knew about type before I did, and somehow they were talking about it at one point. Jamila's older brother, he's an ISTP, he had already told Jamila what she was. And, they have those tests online and everything. And so David and her were talking about my type, and then they were like, they were wondering what type I was. So when I took the test the first time, I got ESTJ. And they all were like, no. And I was like, yeah, I'm not that. I don't know what I am, but I'm not that. And then the second time, I got ESFJ. And I was like, oh, okay, I'd say this is maybe 80% accurate, some things are a little bit off, but hey, it's an online test. I kind of took it like another which Disney princess are you kind of thing. And I kind of discarded it. But then Jamila's older brother told Jamila that he thinks that I'm actually an ENFJ, not an ESFJ. And Jamila went and looked it up, and she was like, oh my gosh, you have to read about this. And I was actually kind of annoyed because I wasn't really into that kind of stuff. I just, once again, saw it as oh, which Hogwarts house are you? Oh, that's cool, Ravenclaw. Anyway, but then when I started reading about ENFJ and it started mentioning stuff like, especially the absorbing of other people's feelings and, just think even the empathy that I have, the kind of empathy that FE and I would carry with it, all of these different kinds of things just started really hitting me on a really deep level. And I was like, whoa, this is explaining me without even knowing me. And then it made me also wonder wait, how does Jamila's brother, who only at the time spoke to me once or twice, already knew what type I was? And so that made me want to pursue this further. And then eventually I got into the cognitive functions, and it put language behind what I already had in my mind. And so that was even more fascinating to me. And I found you guys, and that was a rabbit hole right there.
I like that you said it put language to something you already had in your head, because that was my experience too, is there were things, especially around intuition. I always knew there was something very different about me, how I was wired, how I saw the world. And when I learned about intuition, I was like, oh, about a billion things from my life within about a 3-hour period just started to click, very quickly. So I like the idea of getting that language. Did you have any, so that was when you discovered your type and the language. Were there any moments where you had an aha of, oh my gosh, the meaning of it, not just your type and explanation, but the depth of what this might mean for your life going forward.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing was understanding myself on a deeper level and understanding that there's not inherently anything necessarily wrong with me, but it's just how I was actually wired, especially like being a Christian and everything. It's like, okay, I believe that God actually wired my mind in this way, and he's also wired other people's minds in certain ways. So nobody's inherently, quote unquote, wrong. We just are different. And so instead of trying to get people to become more like me, and instead of people trying to get me to become more like them, we should be helping each other to become more like ourselves, and then ultimately the best version of ourselves.
Do you feel that you got messages that you were wired wrong somehow? I mean, considering your demographic, I'm assuming. So you're a young man, you're African American, and you're Christian.
Yes.
And there's a lot of messages from all of the demographics that each of us is in of an expectation of how we're supposed to show up. So considering the cross section of all of your demographics, were there messages that you got that the way that you were showing up or the way that you were wired wasn't like you were supposed to be showing up different? Maybe you were confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. Even to this day, I still get that. But now I actually know why, as opposed to back then, I didn't necessarily know why. So I grew up in the Bronx of New York, and, you know, that's where, like, you know, especially as a guy, a lot of people, like, you have to, like, kind of be macho, you know what I mean? And you have to, like, kind of, like, have, like, a coldness to you in a way. And I'm just not a cold person. And I didn't really want to put up that front, or I couldn't keep up that front for too long. I'm very empathetic. I'm sort of affectionate, and I really, really like to connect deeply. Like, I just love to, I even probably consider myself like gently invasive, if you will. And so I like to really inquire about people's minds and their, you know, who they are as people. And that's why I believe that I connected a lot more to women than to guys. Because when I would try and do this with guys, it was either their egos, like, what is this? Like, are you gay or something? You know, and it's like, okay, you know, especially like in that time, you know, growing up, like that was just a huge thing. But then on top of that, I felt personally like guys didn't really want to be vulnerable with other guys, because then they probably felt like this guy is going to know my weaknesses and somehow become like the alpha male, or in some way. Like right now, I'm a life coach, and I only have like 2 clients that are guys, and one of them is 14. And so it's kind of like, you know, I guess I always saw it as like, maybe as an ENF, like as a guy, something could be wrong with me, quote unquote, because I'm not showing up like how all the other guys were. And then it was funny in and of itself, because as I connected more with women, then they really liked me. But then they were talking to me about the guys that I didn't necessarily, it's not that I didn't get along with them, but I just didn't connect as deeply with them. And so they were talking to me about those guys. And it's not that I was I wasn't trying to get with almost any of the women that I was really close with, but I was a little bit confused as to why, like, okay, why are you attracted to those guys when they're kind of like, you know, distant, detached, and they don't listen to you? But then here I am, you know, not that I want you, but it's just a little bit, you know, confusing. And then on top of that, like, I like to talk about weird things, you know? So when I found out that I was an intuitive, then that really helped me a lot. Like, you guys talk a lot about intuitive blending, and you guys said that ENFJs do that probably more than any of the intuitives. And I was like, wow, that's definitely accurate, because even to this day, it's like I know how I'm supposed to be around different people. And so I avoid talking about certain topics or going a certain direction, or even saying things in certain ways, because I know how it's going to be received, how it's going to be looked at, and I'm paranoid of being annoying in some way. And so all of these things kind of like, you know, I was going against it unconsciously and consciously. And when I found out about my type, then I became a lot more rested in that, like, wow, this is how I'm supposed to be. Especially like, you know, not that it makes me quote unquote special, But seeing that ENFJs are not that common of a type, and then ENFJ males are not that common of a type, it was like, wow, that makes so much sense. And so that allowed me to be able to rest in it. I was able to look at people that I believe are ENFJs. Like I believe personally, like Kirk Franklin and, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I was looking up to men like that. And I was seeing like, okay, these are great models that, they're not soft. They used their superpowers of empathy to bring change to the world. Nelson Mandela, people like that. And so I could do the same thing. This is not something that I should be ashamed of, but I should embrace it. And that's kind of how it all started.
I think you bring a really good point to the table of looking to models of people that inspire you, that you can emulate. I've always done that in my life too. That resonates deeply with me. I appreciate that, like kind of that idea. So you find out your type, and most people find out their type and they get down the rabbit hole of that. They discover, everything about themselves. But what drives you, Denzel, to then start talking about it, teaching it, coaching around it? Why do you start a YouTube channel? Why are you so active in the community? What is it about it? I'm guessing there's a little bit of your millennial 20-something nature. A lot of millennials are into creating content and communicating through content, which is part of it probably. And there's some extroverted feeling. But is there something that's driving you beyond those things? Is there something that's driving you to create and talk about this?
Yeah. I actually started my YouTube channel because I had so the same things that I said that I couldn't really talk to many people about. I always, and I guess now it like relates a lot to my 9, where I just always felt like, my opinion doesn't really matter. But it's kind of like a thing like, well, I have to get it out somehow. I just have to talk it out somehow. So I actually started my YouTube channel with a video called Conceit versus Confidence, where I was reading a book in class and I had so many thoughts on the concept. And I just started just went on YouTube and I just put up my phone and I just started talking about it. I didn't even care who would watch it. I just wanted to get my ideas out and thoughts on it. I was like, I'm just going to start doing that more. It's almost like a video diary or journal of some sort. Like whatever things that I think about that I don't necessarily feel welcome to have discussion and conversations with people in my real life, I'm just going to go on YouTube and whoever watches it, but nobody's forced to watch it. Nobody's going to tell me, hey, stop, because, this is my channel. I can talk about whatever I want. So it was a space where I could talk freely and openly, and type was something that I was very interested in. And so when I started talking a lot about type and showing how it's been helping me in my interpersonal dynamics and all of that, and how it's been helping me understand and how helpful it can be in society, then I guess that started drawing people closer. And so I didn't necessarily have the aim to become a teacher of it, but I just started talking about it and how it's been helping me. And next thing you know, it's I think that this could actually be useful to people.
So we have a rare opportunity, which is we have someone who knows about and understands type as well as you do. And we have an ENFJ here. And so I would love if you would be willing to play along. I'd love to walk through each of your cognitive functions and ask you how you experience them.
Yeah,
Would you be game for that?
Yeah,
cool.
I'm down.
All right. So take your dominant and we'll go all the way to your inferior. So the driver dominant function for an ENFJ is extroverted feeling, or what we call harmony.
Right.
How do you experience leading with harmony?
I experience it as, I usually define it as knowing the exact buttons to push in the exact order to get an emotional reaction from a group or an individual. And I see it as very socially strategic. I also see it as absorbing feelings. That was a big thing that ever since I was a kid, I knew that of myself. I didn't want to talk to other people about it because, I just don't like the idea of being looked at weird and all of that. But then when I found out about type, it's whoa, that resonates. So FE, extroverted feeling, harmony, that's how I most relate to it. And especially seeing, I also describe it as seeing the lines between me and you, and then seeing the lines between you and Joel, and then seeing the lines between Joel and Jamila, and all of these lines between us. And I can see how thick that line is, but I can also see how like small that line is. And if it's red, for example, then it's like, oh, these two are having problems like that there's a situation going on. There's a conflict going on over there. Oh, that's yellow. I think something's about to happen with those two. And now it's up to me, like, okay, can I diffuse the situation before it happens? Can I diffuse it now after it's happened? So it's kind of like being aware of like everybody's relationship with each other and with me.
That's fascinating. So you're visualizing like colors
Yeah.
in the connections between people.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. And I mean, is that a metaphor, or are you actually seeing those colors?
In my head, I actually see the colors. So I actually can't tell the difference. It sounds weird, but like, yeah, I can't tell the difference if it's just metaphor because I see the image in my head.
So one of the big things that every FJ struggles with is this idea of boundaries, right? Creating healthy boundaries so that other people's emotions or problems or needs aren't assaulting you, right? You're absorbing these emotions, and you're so tapped into people's relationships with each other that you're seeing connection points between them, like visualizing connection points with colors.
Yes.
So what are the kinds of things that you do in order to establish healthy boundaries so that you don't get overrun by this information that's coming at you?
That's a really good question because I really don't know. Like, Jamila would tell me, my wife, she would tell me that I don't care about myself or that I don't necessarily like have boundaries. And I think to an extent that's actually right. You know, like I know about Enneagram now, and it's like, oh, you know, self-preservation blind. So that would also make sense. And then as a social sexual, it's all about merge, you know, connect. That's how I feel. Plus being ENFJ. So it's like all of these things just working for that. But then it kind of helps me a lot too, because in my understanding of other people, that's how, in a way that it makes up for my lack of boundaries, because I'm able to just go and fix the problem. So I'm focused on creating that external harmony so that not only can everybody else be at peace, but then I can be at peace as well. Because unlike maybe like other FJs, extroverted feeling users, I don't have the ability to retreat into myself as a safe space as much. I can't just escape from it. I have to live in the external world. And so that forced me as a young kid to like go out and create these and know how to deal with the conflicts there. And then if it gets too rough, honestly, I just have to walk away from that energy.
So the boundary is, if you can't do anything to help, you got to go.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And I think that's a really important point or distinction between ENFJs and INFJs. That, or even ESFJs and ISFJs. If you are an IFJ, your introverted thinking function is more accessible for retreat. But when you're an EFJ, it's not. Yeah. So you kind of have to be there. You have to sit with that emotional experience, which is probably why EFJs are more assertive about peace, you know, orchestrating peace and getting people's needs met. Because if it's not working out and the morale is low, they don't really have a place they can retreat to.
Yeah.
Or they just get drunk to numb it out, right? I'm kind of kidding, but like, you like go into some kind of extroverted sensing 10-year-old tertiary to kind of just make it fun and distract in the moment.
Yeah, I think I'm most related to extroverted sensing in the way that I would like joke around a lot. I never really got into like super sensational stuff. It's like, I never really got drunk or like, you know, into things like that. But I definitely did have like a extroverted sensation, kind of wanting to fit in and hiding my intuition. I'd make myself more of a clown than I actually am. And so then when it came to moments of like me showing like how serious I was about certain things, then people may not have been used to that, or I was afraid that they would not accept me because I would try to present those kind of things. Like, like my freshman year in college, before I even knew about type, I was with friends who all we did was just make jokes and laugh and stuff like that. And being a social 9, I just want to fit in. A lot of people, they're always talking about like how they stand. I have no shame in saying like, no, I'm the type that will try and fit in. I will try and do things to, pay my way in. And that's what I used to do. And one of the ways I did that was like making jokes and like just trying to like keep everybody laughing and happy. But then when it came to like moments like with that same group of friends, I tried to start like a weekly Bible study. I love Bible studies because I get lots of insights and we start to get to know each other on a deeper level. And even the guys start to feel like a little bit more open because, okay, this is about Jesus, so I guess it's all right, But it wasn't even really like consistent even in that sense. Like only like a couple of friends showed up. One of them was actually Jamila, and then it was just like one other person. It's like, okay, I don't think that this group of friends is really like fit for that. And I was pushing something that was not fit for this group. So then instead of looking for people that were more into that kind of thing, I just kind of like tossed that aside and tried more to be more in that extroverted sensing place.
Yeah. So I do want to get there in a moment. And I especially want to talk about what your loop looks like. But first, let's go to your auxiliary or co-pilot function of introverted intuition or perspectives. How do you as an ENFJ and as an individual person, how are you experiencing that function?
So the most basic way I could say it first is it's cliche, but I have many witnesses. I just know things and I don't know how I know them, but I just know things. And it's gotten to a point, and I don't really say this often because I don't want to make it seem like I'm bragging, but it's gotten to a point that I can know so many things that I pretend like I don't know a lot of things. I pretend like I'm surprised when certain things happen because I've been accused time and time of having a God complex. I never tell people like I told you so, but I guess their own insecurities projected because I'd warned them about something. And then as they're anticipating my I told you so, then because I'm not saying it, then they get annoyed, stuff like that. But yeah, they're like, I just happen to know things. So there's that. I'd also say that it's really attracted me to esoteric things. Even growing up as a Christian and all of that, I was very attracted to the spiritual world. I was very attracted to studying about, celestial beings and demons and, stuff like that. I was very fascinated by that. And then even now that I'm expanding my reach on those kind of things, I'm very interested in, things like concepts like past lives and twin flames and even tarot cards and how all of that works. I'm just like, wow, how are we all looking at these spiritual elements and we're giving them different names? We're looking at the same things, but we're you might call it orange and I might call it black. And it might not even be orange or black. It might be red or it might be blue, so it's kind of like, oh, wow. I just want to make sense of things that are not really, physical, I guess.
So would you say that those things fascinate you because of what they are themselves or because that people believe them and you're trying to understand the sort of the center of the Venn diagram of what somebody else is believing, what you're believing. And it might actually, you're calling it different things, but it might actually be the same thing. Is it more understanding the psychology of people who believe in those things, or is it actually a fascination with those things themselves?
I think it's both. Yeah, I think it's definitely both. I've never been asked that question before, and I'm trying to think through it right now as I talk, but I really do think that it's both. I don't think that there's a preference between it because I really do want to understand why we look at that and then we title it different stuff and then okay, but what is it actually? What? Because clearly there's something there if we're all seeing something, but then I also actually believe no, there is something really there, and I'm very fascinated with figuring out what that is.
The nature of a reality that can't be seen.
Yes. Yeah.
So the thing that we talk a lot about here at Personality Hacker is growing that co-pilot auxiliary function.
Right.
Like that's we keep talking about, if we had to distill it down to a soundbite, that's the soundbite, right? Like grow your co-pilot, grow your auxiliary function.
Right.
Yours is introverted intuition.
Yes.
Perspectives as an ENFJ. Was there resistance at all to going to your introverted intuition? Did you, because I know for me, growing my co-pilot, I resisted it like crazy. I still do sometimes. Did you have resistances come up? Were there, and how did those look if you did?
I want to say no. I don't think that it was hard for me to, like, I don't think I had much resistance toward it, especially when I found out that was my growth. I was like, oh, and I jumped right into it. Like, so I never really related too much to that resistance, but I do know that before then, because of what I was just explaining, you know, like with the types of friends that I'd have and everything, I wasn't showing my insight as much. So I think that could count as the resistance. Like I would have those insights, but then I'd keep them to myself. I wasn't presenting it to the world, and I wasn't allowing myself to spend enough time alone with those insights. But I didn't have a problem spending that time alone, and because I liked being with those thoughts and allowing them to marinate. And I was very fascinated with those thoughts in and of themselves.
So your work was then taking your insights from your intuition, your perspectives, and pushing it out with your extroverted feeling and connecting with people around that.
Yes. It was very difficult for me to find a way to actually share these insights, and sometimes it still is. Because I have to read the group. I have to read how are they going to receive it. And I don't want to lose credibility, you know, etc. I think that growing up as a Christian, it helped a lot because, you know, then you could just speak, you know, like I preached a couple of times. And so that was like an excuse, quote unquote, to go and show the insight. Like, you know, the way that when we'd have Bible studies and I would always bring perspectives, I was infamously known for bringing perspectives that people had never thought of. And I really enjoyed that. And I guess that's where I saw appreciation for it. But other than that, like when it came to like other subjects and stuff like that, I kind of just like hit it.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. Like, I think a lot of us that are extroverts, it's not that we don't enjoy our introverted auxiliary or co-pilot function. I think most of us actually enjoy being there. It's just how is the world going to respond to it?
Yeah.
You know, like that's the thing we've hidden because we don't think it's going to be acceptable.
Yes. And it's like, I know how they're going to respond. And so then that would make me not want to show that.
Yeah, I've got something similar going on with introverted thinking. It's not always the most popular function.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
So before we move on to your 10-year-old or tertiary, what do you think has been a really, like if you could just give another ENFJ maybe one bit of advice for growing their co-pilot, what's been most powerful for you? What would you recommend?
I think it's going to be like a series of activities that you can just choose from. Showers. I hope that, you know, people are showering, you know, but silent showers, they've really helped me. Like I have a video on my YouTube called Shower Portals, where it's like literally as soon as I step into the shower, it's like I'm stepping into a portal that whisks me into the garden of my own mind. And I can't even help but go there, and like as I'm showering, then I'm just exploring all of these different thoughts, and my best insights come to me in the shower. Washing the dishes, you know, I'll just be staring out the window as I'm washing the dishes, and then next thing you know, it's like, whoa, like I'm having all of these other epiphanies. I'm having ideas for videos, you know, going for walks, like, and all of these things, they involve using your extroverted sensing function, which I think we're going to be getting to. But yeah, it's kind of like keeping yourself, like putting yourself on autopilot so that you can allow your mind to be able to wander. And the biggest thing that I've learned this past year even is not being afraid to allow your mind to wander, because I think I used to be afraid of where it could wander to. And even like the stuff that I just brought up, you know, like it's like, okay, I'm allowed to explore these concepts, but I can't explore that. Not because I'm going to actually believe it, but because, you know, it's wrong or it's weird, or you're going to want to talk about it, and people are not going to want to hear you talk about it, and then you're going to get frustrated. So why bother? But now it's like, no, like this is what I thrive off of. I'm going to study all of these concepts. I'm going to allow my mind to wander to all of these different places. So I think that allowing yourself that time to allow your mind to just wander in stillness, it does a lot.
Yeah, I think when you talk about these activities that engage your extroverted sensing or sensation, most of the time I've noticed that, and I've known a lot of NJs who love showers. Like they'll talk about how, I remember a very, very eco-conscious INFJ that was a friend of mine in Southern California, talking about how much guilt he had for the long showers he took. He's like, it's the one thing I can't seem to be eco-friendly about is my showers.
Yeah, same.
And eventually it just kind of dawned on me, these activities hypnotize your extroverted sensing or your sensation, because it's like a repetitive, very comforting feeling. So it sort of lulls that part of you to sleep, which allows your introverted intuition to start, sort of waking up and expanding.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like going on drives, that's another hypnotizing what the word is. Yeah. It like going on a drive, taking walks, showers, even cleaning the house, and it's kind of like, oh, and I'm being productive at the same time. So like, that's cool. But yeah, just putting your body on autopilot so that you can just whisk away into your mind. It's almost like this astral projection of some sort where you're not even really present with your body. You're just in your head exploring everything. And then you come back into reality. And that even happens a lot. Like when I'm in conversation, like I'll be talking and then my mind will just like whisk me away somewhere else, and then I have to like tune back in. So yeah. Yeah.
There is one thing you do. You didn't mention it, but I know you do it. And I want to mention it before I go to that tertiary 10-year-old function. You are extremely good at thoroughly investigating other people's worldviews.
Oh yeah, I'd like to think so.
Yeah, like, I mean, you're very, and I use the word thorough very intentionally. Like, you don't just hear somebody's worldview, you very much probe into it.
Yes.
And do you feel like that's helped facilitate your perspectives function too?
Insanely. I watch so many videos on things that I intentionally look up, things that I don't understand how it would make sense for somebody to do that, so that I can understand. Because in my opinion, everything makes sense to somebody, And so if I'm just as, convinced in my own opinion, then somebody else could be equally as convinced in their own opinion. And I just want to know, why are you convinced in that opinion? Whether it's right or wrong, I want to know why you're so convinced about it. And I want to understand it so well that if somebody was to come to me and talk badly about how you believe that opinion, I could argue it so well that like it would defend that person. Like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. I guess that makes sense how they believe it. I mean, I don't necessarily buy it. And it's like, yeah, I don't buy it either, but I can see how they bought it. And I don't think that they're stupid for believing that, because this is how it makes sense to them. This is why they did what they did. This is why they believe what they believe.
Perfect. So, and I kind of want to tag that for later, because I have a reason I wanted to make sure that you mentioned that. And also because sure. I think that's so high leverage for people of your type. And it's one of the reasons why you show up so, like mature beyond your years is how I would.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Wow. Antonia Dodge is telling me that. Oh my goodness.
There you go. On air and recording. So let's go to your 10-year-olds or tertiary function of extroverted sensing or sensation. How do you experience that function?
I think that I'm very agile. So that's one thing. Like I like to, I ride a skateboard around campus. I do see myself as aware and quick on my feet and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd say like, I'm pretty like agile and athletic. Would
you say performance?
Oh, performance. Yeah. So I write spoken word poetry, and I did acting in high school. And when I would act, then I do believe that I make a pretty good actor. And so I'm able to play with the energy in the room, and I'm able to assert myself in certain ways. And I'd also say that my extroverted sensing like helps me with knowing when to jump into action. So I'm always tracking timing. That's something that's very impeccable for me. I track timing very, very heavily, and I see it as like double dutch in a way, even in conversations. Like, okay, when will be the prime moment to put this piece of the conversation in there? When will be the prime moment to make this move? Like, I'm always tracking timing, and I just make my move when I believe that the time is right. So I think that's where my extroverted sensing like really shines, like in that patience that comes from my introverted intuition, and then my extroverted sensing is like now, and then I listen right away and I jump into it.
Are there any ways in which you feel, because it's your tertiary, what are ways in which you feel like, it's funny because when I asked you, you gave a couple of comments and you went, almost like it got capped out real quick. But are there ways in which you feel like you don't access it, or like your limited access can be a challenge for you? I guess another way of asking it is, or maybe an easier way is, how do you feel like you loop between your driver and your 10-year-old?
I think so. Looping, that's always been a concept that when it was presented to me, I could only relate to it in one way, from at least how I understand it. And I've been like analyzing myself, and I really just feel like the only way that I related to looping was that trying to fit in, ignoring my insights and ignoring trying to share them so that I could like play around with other people and everything. And I've literally had several people, well, 3 people actually, three people tell me that, hey, Jamila was one of them. She was like, hey, I like this you better than the other you. And I'm like, oh. And I knew exactly what she was talking about, because that was a time where I actually like showed my insight. And then there was the other 2 people, like when I would like play and goof off and stuff like that, then they told me like, that doesn't look good on you. And I was like I actually asked this person, I was like, really? And this was after what Jamila had told me. I was like, well, what makes you say that? And she didn't even really like know about type, but she was an ESFP, and she was telling me like, yeah, like that looks good on, so-and-so who was actually also an ESFP, and that looks good on that person, but you're like the chill, wise guy, that's like this and like that. So when you act like this, then it just doesn't seem like it's you. And I was like, oh. And that's what made me start being like, wow, well, this is keeping me from fitting in with the rest of the group. So I should probably start presenting what is actually me. And I'm glad that now it's like being accepted a little bit more.
So like more the image management piece of extroverted sensing.
Yeah.
That was what was kind of tripping you up.
Yeah.
And then going more shallow.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. So what about that fourth and final function of introverted thinking or accuracy? How does that show up for you?
So number 1, the unhealthy ways that it showed up for me was I can be biting with my remarks even when I'm kind about them. So I can be very facetious, like if I'm upset enough. And so throughout, whenever I'd like, I mentioned how I'm like socially strategic. And so I could see how extroverted feeling and introverted thinking like work together, because I would know the exact data to say about a person. Like, I'm not going to just say something like, oh, that's why your mom smells like a donkey, or, something. I'm going to say truthful things about you that I didn't even know I had, that I didn't even know that I gathered access to. If you were to ask me right now to access whatever I'd say about you, Joel, so if I was to upset you, DZ, what would you say? I don't know. But if you were to actually push me to that limit, then I could keep the smile on my face, and I would just start things I didn't even know that I'd gathered about you. I would just start saying them, and I'd know exactly how to say them to where like it's like I'm aiming to make you cry and never want to come at me in that way again. So that was one unhealthy way. and I have a few others if you want.
Yeah, sure, but being cruel.
Yeah. And it didn't happen often. It was more of like a self-defense kind of thing. And also, you know, being a 9, passive aggressiveness. So I related to that right away. I was like, okay, yeah, that's me. So, but yeah, that's a lot like how it comes out. But it also comes out in like, now I'm doing a lot better with this. And I've been trying to show the mergence between being able to tactfully tell the truth. Because I think that I used to go too heavily on just tact, but then not sharing the truth enough. So I would never lie to people. Like, if you can't sing, I'm not going to tell you that you can sing. If you're not attractive, in my opinion, I'm not going to tell you that you're attractive, in my opinion. You know, so I would never lie to people, but I would just withhold truth from them so that I could keep the peace. And, you know, it's the stereotypical thing on shows like, oh, I was just trying to protect you, you know, but then you're withholding that truth from them. So that was one thing that I used to really do. And over the past few years, I've been learning like, hey, here's how I can present truth, but then still be kind and gentle about it. You don't have to have one or the other. And so I'm all about telling the truth, but for example, I don't really like the term sugarcoating, or at least not in like a bad way. I personally see it as like, I'd rather take Motrin than Robitussin, you know? And if I don't drink the Robitussin, then like the Robitussin could be strong, but if I refuse to accept it, then it's not going to heal me. And so in the same sense, just because you sugarcoat a message doesn't mean that it dilutes what the truth is. If you can find that balance of delivering it in a manner that the truth still remains integral, then I think that it could still have an effect, and that's what I've had to work on.
So for an international audience, what is Motrin and what's Robitussin?
Oh, yeah. So Motrin, I remember that as like a medicine. So both of them are medicine. But Robitussin, I just remember it being very, very bitter. And it's like, yeah, it works, but it's so bitter, and you'd have to try very hard for me to take it. But Motrin, even if I was not sick, I would take it, and it works too, you know? And so in the same sense, if you want to deliver truth, then why not give it in a way that's pleasing to people? And it's like, oh, but you know, that's diluting the message. It doesn't have to dilute the message. You have to find a way to be able to like marry those two in a way so that I think that it's equally important to not lose the integrity of that truth, but then also deliver it in a way that the person will actually be receptive of it. I think that's when you have the best results. And so with my TI Inferior, I leaned more on not telling the truth, on withholding it instead and just keeping the peace. But now it's like, okay, let me find the way to tell the truth, but then my introverted intuition helps me to remove a lot of collateral damage while still keeping that the effect that I want.
So I'm glad you mentioned introverted intuition or perspectives here as a way to help make up for any challenges you have in your 3-year-old or inferior introverted thinking or accuracy. Because we talk a lot about that. Like the recommendation is that you don't necessarily have to work on your 3-year-old or inferior, but eventually we get to a point when we're ready. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, I've found that working on your auxiliary or co-pilot oftentimes does make up for some of the blind spots. Yeah. And you and I were talking offline about using introverted thinking, because you and I both use introverted thinking and extroverted feeling. We just have them in different positions in our car. Mm-hmm. And I was talking a little bit about how my introverted thinking works when I'm deconstructing an argument, when I'm deconstructing how like debate and really kind of filleting out all these concepts and getting them really very digital and sort of surgically removing them all. And I remember you kind of being like, yeah, I don't do quite that.
Yeah.
I'm more looking for the center of the Venn diagram.
Yeah.
But what you mentioned you did, and you might want to talk a little bit about this, and this is why I tagged this earlier when you were talking about perspectives, is that you just get really thorough in understanding people's worldviews.
Yes.
And so when we were discussing how we we understand what other people are thinking. I do that deconstruction, that massive deconstruction, but you do the thorough understanding. So can you talk a little bit about how thoroughly understanding other people's worldviews has helped you understand what you believe and helped you understand sort of how to maybe not debate, but play in a space maybe that other people would think is reserved for introverted thinking or accuracy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. So I'm obsessed with being right, but not in the sense of stubbornness, like, no, I know I'm right and I'm aggressive. In fact, it'd be like the opposite. If I feel in any way that I'm wrong, then I'm like, oh my goodness. And I kind of like have like a little panic attack and I'm like, well, I have to replace this bad information with the right information. And so in doing that, I because I'm so obsessed with being right and, you know, not being called out for being wrong, I like to look at everybody's perspective because who knows who's really right, and I don't want to be blind in my own eyes. So my mind is full of a whole bunch of Venn diagrams, whether it comes to like religions or, you know, ideologies or, you know, values, all of these different things. And I'm looking for what they all have in common, and then what they all are different, like what they all have differently. And I'm trying to understand all of them holistically. So I will spend hours, you know, either researching a topic or talking to somebody who's very, very into whatever ideology that they have. And I want to understand it so much that I could even argue their perspective as if I owned that perspective. And then if I'm able to actually understand it that deeply and then compare it to my own perspective or all of the other things, all the other perspectives that I know, then I'm able to be like, well, these things don't really add up. They contradict in a manner. And so I'm going to discard that, or I don't think that really resonates with me. And then from there, I'm able to trickle down what I actually believe based on all of the perspectives and the information that I've gathered.
Yeah. Well, when you said you're obsessed with being right, the first thing, and you said not with being right, but with almost like you're obsessed with having truth.
Yeah.
And immediately I thought, well, that's your introverted thinking or accuracy aspiration, right? Like that's how it whispers in your ear. It's like make sure make sure you have truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what's really interesting about you taking the time to because that's a time-consuming process to really investigate what's going on with another person, because we live in a soundbite culture, and we're so used to believing we know what somebody thinks or their worldview or their perspective is through quick titles or identities, right? Like somebody will give you one single word and you just assume, you know, something that they believe describes them, and you just assume you know everything about them. You've taken the time to go, well, I'm not going to make that assumption. I'm going to keep pursuing and keep investigating this person's complete worldview.
Yes.
And would you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, because I know how that feels for me. You know, I feel like so often people have not listened to me and completely tried to understand where I'm coming from with things, and I don't want other people to feel that way. I don't like when I feel like I'm unheard. I don't like when people just like, oh, you're a Christian, so you hate gay people, you this, and they just kind of like write me off. It's like, wait, you didn't even give me a chance to explain this. You know, I'm very nuanced in the way that I think about certain things, like, but then they don't have the patience, or they don't have the interest, or, you know, oh, it's too long, you know, stuff like that. And so because I know how it feels for me, I don't want to put other people through that. And I understand how wrong people can get me, and it's like I don't want to get anybody else wrong in that manner. Yeah. So I don't have any problem giving them that time.
And would you say it's high leverage to do so? Would you recommend to other ENJs in particular to just carve out that time to really get inside other, not making assumptions about other people's worldviews, but actually do investigation?
Yes, I would highly recommend that, especially if you're a leader, because if you're going to be leading people, then you want to be right. You want to have truth. You don't want to seem biased, because then that's when things start going in the wrong manner. But if you are someone who's influencing, then you have to know, like the old Spider-Man quote, with whom much is given, much is required. Well, that's a Bible verse. But then it's kind of like the same principle where it's like, if
with
you
great power comes
great responsibility. Yeah, see, I get all of these things like mixed up. But yeah,
Spider-Man, the Bible,
yeah, kind of like the same thing, right? But yeah, like when you have that kind of power, you have to use that appropriately. And knowing that, I'm often someone who people do come to for such advice. I don't want people to walk away from me and then come back and be like, you gave me the wrong advice, or like, that's totally not what that person was thinking, So I think that, yeah, if you're an ENJ and you're just jumping to like make decisions, it's good that we're able to make decisions pretty quickly and everything. But when you take that time and that patience to really make sure that you have your information right, the decision that you make, like, that saves you time from trying to fix it later on in the future. And so I think that that's where introverted intuition comes in again, because once again, that collateral damage, if you do it right the first time, you don't have to redo it later on. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. We call it, Joel and I, whenever we do something like that, we call it giving a gift to our future self.
Oh, yeah.
If we just take the time right now, we give a gift to our future self.
Yeah, and it takes time, but it's so worth it.
I'm sure it's a lot like learning a language too, as you start to get familiar with learning languages. So you get familiar with perspectives, other people's worldviews. They get, like, you start to notice the pattern of the patterns, and it's not so much grueling introverted work after a while. You start to get better. It's like any skill, right?
Yes.
So I'm guessing it's something you can build skill over time doing.
Yes, I'd say it's like linguistics in a way. It's like, oh, this Spanish word sounds like this English word, which sounds like this French word. And so this ideology kind of sounds similar to this, kind of sounds similar to that. And then when you're able to like really look at it, it's like, oh, since I know Spanish, then Portuguese is not really that different, and then since I know Latin, then, you kind of, so it's kind of like the same thing.
And then it helps facilitate what you said at the very beginning of the podcast, that your desire is to be a peacekeeper.
Yes.
And to help people come to a simpatico and understanding of each other.
Yes.
So it doesn't just help you, but it also helps facilitate that peacekeeping.
That's right. Because I feel like if we understand each other, then we can have more compassion and empathy for each other. And my goal is always to approach a situation without any guns. I want to show other people that, hey, I do not have any intention for you to lose face. I'm not one to want to debate and everything, because I don't want people to feel like they're competing. I'm one to sit down and let's discuss, so that if I walk away and I ended up being wrong, it's like, oh, I don't feel like I lost face. In fact, I feel like I've gained truth. And I want you to feel the same way. If I'm right, I don't want you to feel like, dang it, Denzel embarrassed me, and I thought I was this. But no, like I'm it's all right. I understood why you thought that previously. It makes sense. You're not stupid. But yeah, this is the right information from what I've gathered, and now I'm glad that we were able to talk this over. Let's go and continue to spread that truth. And when we spread that truth and we get that understanding, then I feel like we have an overall better society.
All right, ENFJs out there, and those that have an ENFJ in your life, we had one in the studio now, and we captured one in real life, and we forced him to talk to us and tell us all about the stuff that ENFJs want to know more about. Or if you have an ENFJ in your life, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that I think that, we tend to, in the type community, and even here at Personality Hacker, we tend to, of the two NFJs, INFJs do tend to get a lot of attention because they're interested. There's a lot of INFJs interested in type. They tend to be the ones swirling in the community interested. But I think there's a lot of ENFJs that deal with very similar things, absorbing emotions, trying to figure out how to balance that extroverted feeling with the world and get into that perspectives process. There's a lot of richness here. So
we love the INFJs too, though. Just so I know.
I know, but I'm loving the fact we're giving some love to the ENFJs in the audience. If you're an ENFJ listening, now's your chance. You've been listening along, or you've got somebody in your life that is an ENFJ, or you just have a general comment, some observations or insights or questions. Again, your story. We'd love to hear your story. That would be awesome. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this podcast. We want to hear from you. What do you have to say now? You're the fourth person that's been part of this conversation. Come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice known.
Thank you so much, DZ, for being willing to be interviewed by us. It was a total pleasure.
Yeah, it was an honor for me.
Where can people find you online?
You can find me on YouTube as Denzel Mensah, so that's Mensah, and you can also find me on Twitter, DZ2_blessed, so that's DEEZY, the number 2_blessed. Those are the best places.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. You can leave us a rating review on iTunes. That helps us out a lot. If you've been following the podcast, you know you must get 11 copies of our book. But if you aren't prepping for the zombie apocalypse, then just get 1 copy of the book because it's super duper good and you're going to really enjoy it. And then once you do, leave us a rating review of the book on Amazon. That helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thanks to our guest, Denzel Mensah, for being here in the studio this week. We will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.